So welcome everyone. Good morning. Yes, my name is Juan Carlos, and together with my colleague Adolfo, we work as a software engineer at mimacom in Madrid. And well, recently we have been working with an architecture, with a solution that was pretty interesting for us because it's different to the rest of library projects we have been working on so far. I think this is also a good example because it shows not only the potential, but also the flexibility and versatility that library provides us. And I say this because we built an application that we are using library as a headless platform, and also with some external integration with external sources. Not only SAP and Hybris, you will see different external integration. So in order to talk about this architecture, I would like to go back to our requirements, the requirements that we have at the beginning of the architecture. So basically, we needed a content management system, and this CMS should not be only able to get information from itself, but also should be able to get information from external sources, from external data sources. So it was not only a CMS, we also needed an integration portal. Library fits perfectly in our requirements, but we had a new requirement, and it was like, okay, you need a custom design of the front end. So basically, our front end application should work as a single page application. We needed a totally custom design of our application. So here, the idea of headless was born, and we splitted the backend from the front end. In this case, we are using Angular 6 as our front end, but we can use whatever. I mean, we can use any wearable or any mobile application can consume this API we are providing.
Okay, so starting, here you can see our high-level architecture or high-level solution. Then, as you can see, as my partner said, we have this library in the center of everything. And in front, we have, in this case, we have an Angular application. And in the future, we are adding a mobile application in front of it. The Angular could be switched to another different. Some people start to think to use React, whatever at the end. So we have this library in the center. We have library accessing a lot of data coming from Elasticsearch, independent Elasticsearch, data from Oracle, also data from a lot of applications. We put like a cloud here, but we have SAP, we have Hybris, we have SharePoint, but we have really a lot of integration data there. So, okay, going down to a more low-level architecture, when we first start to design our architecture, we think in two main things, I would say. First, we want to divide in 3 layers of application. The REST layer will be the only one communication with the Angular application. The service layer will be the one that will do all the transformations to DTO, will prepare the data to isolate the REST controller from the integration from the data. It will be the one in the middle. And of course, integration layer. Going a bit deep here in the REST layer, the other thing that we want to do here in architecture is to go in an internal microservice, I would say architecture, but we did a lot of micro OSGI modules. Every one of them just focus on doing one thing, but doing it well. So as you can see, for our REST layer is here we have 2 options to start to work on. We can use the library service builder just to generate the REST layer for us, or we can go for the library REST standard and JAX-RS controllers here. We went for the second options because we want a lot of custom, we want a lot of flexibility, and we don't want to bind to our data in the database. So this is what we have here, a lot of OSGI modules publishing APIs. Then in the service layer, as I said, we have this one that is trying to isolate our controller layer or REST layer from all the data. So what it does? Okay, give me some users, but I don't know. I don't like to know where the users are. So we have the user service that maybe has to communicate with the sub-service. Maybe another service has to intercommunicate between them. So in the third layer is where we have all the data integration here on our service layer needs to communicate with at the end. For example, our user service, in that case, will try to fetch data from users in layer database because it needs them, but also it needs data from Hybris, or it also needs data from SAP. That's why we try to divide our integration layer into parts. Here in the Liferay core services is all the Liferay already published OCI modules that we use as ready to be injected in our service and to retrieve all the data from Liferay. This is what the Liferay provides to us. This was really good to have it in the core. And the other part is where we make our integration adapter to retrieve data from all the rest of the data or the rest of external sources that we have. In our case, we wanted to use something really flexible. This was our philosophy through all the projects. In that case, we want to use a Spring integration. We will go to really in depth after a little bit later in the talk why we use Spring integration. But at the end, we want a lot of channels. We want to use a mock repository. We want to use a different authentications with different authentications layer that maybe our sources had, and we want really something flexible, and we don't want to develop a custom specific solution for each of our sources. So the rest of the talk, we will try to divide our presentation in 3 main layers. First, the REST layer, then we will talk a bit about all the search services that is a bit gross, and then the integration layer. So Juan Carlos will continue explaining to the REST layer.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about REST. We are in a headless concept, so we really need to expose all data to the front end from our backend. So basically, we built an JAX-RS application, JAX-RS lawyer over our Liferay. Okay, how did we do it? Basically, we use a Liferay REST extender that allow us exactly this, to install this JAX-RS application to serve this API over our Liferay. So the main advantage of this is that we were able to have the Liferay session into our REST layer. Okay, so basically, it's Angular is the front end in this case who manage this session and in order to interact with our application. We also needed to test our API, the whole one. So basically, we create also a suite of integration tests, a new lawyer that will test all our endpoints in our API, verifying that the data are the one that we want. Here we have what we consider as a pending subject, because due to restriction times, we were not able to do what we really wanted to do, that is try to implement a new authentication system, something like not using the basic auth of Liferay, but probably use OAuth or probably a JSON Web Token. So in this picture, we have a nice example of our life cycle of our request. Okay, so in this case, this is like an endpoint to get information of an user. So basically, the request will reach our Liferay REST extender, and the first thing it finds is the JAX-RS filters that we built. In first place, we have the Xtivia filters. This is a filter that allows us to check the user's role, okay? And if the user role is the one that we really want, we have other kind of filter. These filters are built totally custom. They are our filters, and basically provide a new layer of authorization. Now we will get, and we will see how it works. So basically, if the filters are successful, the request will be redirected to the controller, and we will serve the content. Okay, so this is the picture, but let's see a little bit about code. So how are we building? How are we designing our API? We are using Swagger. This tool gave us, let's say, the opportunity to build an API. Basically, we wrote our API in JSON format, following the OpenAPI specification, and all our interfaces are automatically generated using the code generation of Swagger. Okay, so basically, we configure the code gen in order to create a JAX-RS code, JAX-RS client. So as you can see, there are some annotations that are really familiar with. You are familiar with this notation. Like, for example, this is a get endpoint. is serving content in this path, in user's user ID, produce JSON, and returns user data. So on your left, you can see these automatically generated interfaces, and we only have to worry about how to implement the business logic. Okay, so that's what you can see on your left. Basically, we have to give or provide some details here. As you can see, we have the regular role annotation. This is the Xtivia's one. So basically, we can use at class level or even also method level. So basically, all the users has to belong to this role in order to execute some endpoints or some endpoints of this API. Then you can see the add data verification. This is an annotation of our custom filters. Basically, it's checking that the user ID parameters, we can use any parameters, is the correct one, is the user who is logged. Basically applies a new authorization layer. And one of our advantages using this Liferay REST extender is that we have the session in place. So basically, we use add context, and with this annotation, we have the sessions of Liferay in our REST layer. Okay, so we just saw this, what is inside, the behavior of our endpoint, but we would also like to show how we implement, how we apply this Liferay REST extender, this JAX-RS over Liferay. So it was really easy because we built an OSGI component, as you can see. The only thing we have to do is change the service by the application class and send the property JAX applications to true because we want to use JAX-RS application. It serves content to this application path /users/v1, and we extend from service-ward the XP application. That this way is how we enable the Xtivia roles, the Xtivia annotation, the Xtivia filters. Okay, so as you can see, it's also pretty easy, pretty straightforward to inject some of our custom filters. So you can see how we reference the service, the component, our custom one, and we are injecting it in our REST layer. And the same with the API where we are going to implement this, the one that is generated by Swagger. We also built some custom exceptions mappers. Basically, from our API, we can throw some exceptions, some runtime exceptions that will be managed for these exception mappers and will return the code, the HTTP code that we want to send to the front end.
Okay, so going back to our all-level architecture, the next thing that we are going to talk about is a bit how we manage this search with this a lot of data coming from, in our case, our isolated Elasticsearch components. So this was our first approach here when we want to integrate with Liferay with a lot of different indices in Elasticsearch, because this was the main different with a normal Liferay project where you only have Liferay content in Elasticsearch. Here we have a lot of content. So we have a lot of indices. A lot of indices are coming in the future. Depending on the search, you want to search in one indices and not in another indices. So you don't want to have an Elasticsearch populated and managed only by Liferay because it will be really shared with a lot of services. So this was our first approach that didn't work. For example, we wanted to go back. For example, we tried to use this Liferay search service in the middle. That at the end, what it does is tend to use the Liferay wrapper for the Java Elastic client that we have here. And at the beginning, we only tried to make a custom part before and trying to use the Liferay search service, but we want a really more custom solution. In that case, we came totally eliminating the Liferay search service, removing that, and only using the Liferay wrapper for Elastic Client. That was really good and give us a lot of flexibility. In that case, what we manage is all the query builder, even for the Liferay content. And we made a custom aggregation. We made, typical Java strategy, like an interface and a lot of implementation that each of us provides queries on aggregators depending on the sources. So think we can show a bit of code to that here. At the end, as you can see, it's a typical search here that on the end, what we are doing here in this method is trying to retrieve to the user a nested list of results that we coming from a lot of different data. Well, as you can see here in the highlight lines, where we're trying to use the Liferay elastic line, that's really powerful. But at the end, we are providing to, as you can see in the second line, that we have this Liferay query service get query at the end is the custom method that we had to build the query, and then in the follow lines, we try to do for all the type of hits or type of aggregation, we try to aggregate this data and send to the user. So yeah, it's what's really good to use Liferay for this part. What's powerful is the wrapper part that provides in front of the Elasticsearch is really good, better than to work with the only Elastic client. Yeah, so it was a good part. So going back to architecture. Yeah. Okay, so starting with the last part of the architecture, where it is this integration layer that we have here. Remembering back is when we retrieve all the data. We want specifically talking about this part, the integration adapter, where we have Spring integration. So the first part is to ask or tell you why we want the Spring integration. This is not part of Liferay, but we want this flexibility that Spring integration provides to us. One of the first reasons we have is, usually in a project where you have to work with a backend team and a frontend team, usually they have different speeds, a lot of blocking. Okay, I need an API now that sends me data. I have to build a front-end mock. That doesn't work. From developer gets blocked for a lot of time. Yeah. Different velocity. So we want to have a mock repository. So the first thing that we did is, before starting with the real data, we make a mock repository for all the sample data that the front-end will get. So here, what we built at the end is this mock repository. We put a lot of different channels into Spring integration. So one of the first things that we did in Spring integration is, okay, I publish a gateway that, okay, get me the data of this user. So what the Spring integration will do is, okay, you are requesting mock or real. You are requesting mock, here you have the mock. And it was the beginning. We want to make really configurable, and when the real data is there, then we have SAP down, okay, go to the mock. It's okay to start to continue developing in front of that. And of course, after you get this first decision here, you go to another decisions. For example, you want to go to SAP, you want to go to Hybris, okay, but SAP is basic house, Hybris is SO house, and other different authentication, okay, when we manage. Spring will reverberate or create a different bin for REST template based on authentication. And we'll continue to retrieve the data, and it's really transparent. Data will go back and send back to the gateway. Also, we have like a listener in this case, listening constantly to the RSS data and storing data in memory and updating constantly. So when we query for RSSs, we only get the data from memory and send back to the user. This is why we want a Spring integration. This worked really, really well and gave us a lot of flexibility, and we didn't have to write too much code, only Spring configuration. Yeah, okay, go for the data, retrieve data, send data. So, okay.
Okay, thank you, Adolfo. So basically, from now on, we have two contexts instead of just one. We have a problem here, and because each context has its own dependency injector manager. So basically, the problem is that the contexts were not able to talk with each other, were not visible. So that's why we use Liferay Spring Extender. Basically, allow us to, let's say, expose our Spring context as a OSGI component, as an OSGI services. So from now on, we were able to inject one service, one OSGI component into one Spring bin, and the other way, try to inject one Spring bin into our OSGI container, okay, and be used. How did we do it? In your left, as you can see on your left, there is a OSGI component. Basically, this component is it's reading information from the Liferay control panel. It's pretty simple. And as you can see, on your right, you have an Spring bin. Okay, they are totally different contexts. So we only have to use this service reference annotation, and our OSGI component is from now on inside this Spring Bean. Okay. Remember this slide because we'll be, let's say, we will talk about it in the future in something like 2 sliders. And basically, what you have to keep in memory or keep in mind is that we have a Bean and a Spring Bean that into this Spring Bean we have a Node.js component injected and can be used. Okay, so we also needed the other way. We also need to inject one Spring Bean into our custom services, into our OSDI services. As Adolfo said, we create a gateway with several methods that call to external applications. It was done using a Spring integration. So basically, we have to inject this Spring integration, this Spring Bean, into our OSDI services, okay, into our Liferay OSDI component. It was pretty simple because once we use this Liferay REST extender, this Spring context is available, is exposed as a OSDI component, and we can use it with the add reference. Okay, we don't even need the Bean reference annotation because it's exposed as an OSDI component. And of course, from now on, we can use our Spring Bean methods that belong to the gateway in our custom OSDI components. Okay, so we also need, as Adolfo said, we have mock repositories. Sometimes we have to do real calls to the external sources, to SAP or Hybris, but there are other times that we really need to provide some mock data. So basically, we injected one OSDI configuration module before this decision. So depending on one value that is in the control panel, we can decide, the user can decide if he wants to retrieve mock data or he really wants to call to the external source. Okay, remember the Bean I just said 2 slides ago, the one that has an OSDI component inside into this Spring Bean. Basically, we declare the Bean using the Bean Spring tag. It's pretty simple. But inside this Spring Bean, we have an OSDI component. So basically, using the Spring integrator component, the router one, we can read the configuration using this Spring Bean from our control panel, and of course decide if we should go to the. We have two channels in Spring integration. We should go to get the mock repository information, or if we really need to call to the external sources.
Okay, I think as a final summary of this, we want to show you, for example, like a request workflow, go through all the system in our case. That was one of the first things that we tried to do before starting to work, but it's really good to see it as a summary. First, I'm going to be a user. In this case, I could be an Angular application, could be a Postman, could be a mobile, doesn't matter. I will try to do a request, okay, give me the product number 1. So our REST layer will get the product. Okay, we see the petition and see, okay, product service. Okay, bring me that product. I want a DTO, specific DTO to this product. I don't want to care what is internal or where the data come from. Then, our product service, we try to find, okay, I need to call Liferay core services, or I need to call only the Spring integration. In that case, will be only the product gateway, in our case. We'll try to retrieve the data. And our Spring integration, in that case, will be configured to use real data and will go through Hybris. In that case, will be an OAuth authentication. We'll request data later on, and we'll bring the data. Okay, will be retrieve a lot of OAuth data that will be parsed to a more JSON standard way. Then it will be sent back to the product service that will retrieve a lot of integration data that doesn't care about. It will transform it. In our case, we use Docker for that, to transform the data to a real DTO that the controller expects. And yeah, the controller will retrieve the data in a JSON way to the front-end application based on the Swagger contract. So it's something that we care a lot about. So I think that's all. As previous conference has said, please rate this application. Now you have our contact details here.
We still have time for questions. If anyone has one, do ask questions because I got to throw this awesome microphone at someone. I personally liked very much how you use the Liferay Spring extender. There you go. But I'm going to throw. That's that's the microphone part.
It really works. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It really worked. Yeah.
So you exposed your own REST services for clients, but did you mix and match also with the Liferay core services? Did you also expose them for AngularJS and use them from the client, or?
No, at the end we hide all the Liferay API core because we want to have a total custom of what we are going to expose. In our case, it's only what is shown in the Swagger, for example.
Okay, thank you.
More questions? It's more difficult than it seems. I'm not going to try and throw that far.
That's a good tool.
Okay.
I like it.
You were talking about Headless API.
Yeah.
The details of these APIs are publicly available in portal or not?
You mean in our?
For example, I want to add a file entry or document to the portal. The Headless API of that particular service is available to Liferay.
Yeah, we expose this customs API, that customs endpoints. We are not providing the Liferay API. So when we need to use one component, one, let's say, service, one endpoint that is coming from Liferay, we build our own service and call to the Liferay one.
Okay.
Basically, we expose everything. So when the frontend needs to talk with our backend, of course, it needs a custom services. So it's all the integration, all the REST layer is custom. We are using some endpoints of Liferay, but are not exposed to the frontend.
Yeah.
We are using internally.
In that case, as you say, for example, the documents in Liferay document library, but it was, for example, it was a really quick service. It's only a REST client that calls a service that at the end calls a Liferay core service and return the data. Only change a bit, maybe the DTO or that we agreed in the Swagger contract. But for example, it's really quick to develop.
No, it's wonderful. So, just a quick question: which one was the real value that Liferay bring in this case?
Sorry?
Which one was the value of using Liferay here? I mean, because you can just easily do that without using Liferay. Actually,
I think we are using a lot of backend features of Liferay. For example, we are using all the users management layer, all the web content management also. We are using the site groups management, all the roles one.
okay.
We are using everything in the backend. So our Liferay is like a gateway. You call Liferay for get information, and Liferay can provide information from itself of the backend of Liferay, or can call to external sources. So it was, I mean, it was pretty good for us.
How long it took to you to make that integration? Just if you can answer it right.
This integration, the whole one or only the layer?
The whole one.
Something like less than 1 year, probably.
9 months, I think.
Yeah.
Actually.
Like
Okay.
that.
Thank you, guys.
So when you were running Liferay in the headless mode, did you invest some time in maybe disabling some modules that you didn't need to lower the memory footprint, or wasn't it even necessary? Because you're not using any UI, right? And exposing your services. So did you do anything related to that?
Well, we expose all the API, but
Yeah. I was asking whether you, for example, try to make Liferay smaller, start faster by disabling some OSGI modules you never used because they're used only in the UI. So
Okay. Yeah.
basically we are using the library
At the end, we tried to remove some SGI modules at the beginning. It was a hard part. We tried to start to make it smaller. We didn't get too much success at that. I would like to say.
So it was not possible. We just had to use the whole thing.
Because at the end, maybe some interrelations, maybe, but we didn't spend too much time on that.
Hi, thank you for a nice presentation. I have a question regarding the permission annotation on the REST layer. You had roles used there, this is like direct usage of Liferay roles,
Yeah.
and how is it connected? If you can describe it a little bit.
Yeah, this is well, this annotation is the Xtibia one. So it's basically we only have to extend from this service word the XP application, and we have these annotations in place. So we can use we are using the Liferay's role. So we only have to use the name of the role that we want to check if the user who is calling to this API has the role.
And in this case, would it be somehow feasible to use also like permissions, so still keep the
Yeah,
Liferay permissioning system?
Yeah, at the end, for example, in our case, we had to use, as you can see here, we have our custom filter data verification. We also have another, we moved that to the permissions layer, for example, for Liferay. In that case, we use not annotation in that case, but we use the permissions layer of Liferay just to check if the user has access to do something, throw, for example, a forbidden exception to the top. But like we did with data verification at the end, here in the annotations, you can have some code that have access, thanks to that, to all in the request. You have all the user data, all the user session information. You have all them, so you can make any custom annotations and put any custom filters, any requirement that you have. It's really flexible to start to work on that.
Last question, that's a good one. So, no, I was wondering, it's also related to the authorization or authentication. If you, have your authentication also progress to the backend? So if you have an authentication personally on SAP or something, or it's just generic?
For example, in our case, we were using technical users with SAP. Technical users that work generic to all users and maybe work with some, in case of OAuth, we've been using, for example, the client IDs. Client IDs that, in our case, Hybris or SAP believe us. Okay, you have a technical user and I believe any request from this kind of technical user. We don't have to propagate, in our case, the authentication to the external sources, but it was not a requirement for us at the moment. So I think it should be possible, but we didn't have to do that.
Yeah, because it's nice in their backend systems. They want to know, well, in this case, maybe not in SAP, but in healthcare, they need to know which person is getting which record.
It should be really possible to do that. At the end, you can propagate all the data from the user through all the layers.
Thank you for the questions, and thank you guys for the presentation. Enjoy the lunch.